We're now going to go to Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Carson, thank you very much for joining us on Breitbart News Sunday.
Hello?
Hello, Dr. Carson?
Yes.
This is Steve Bannon. Thank you very much for joining us on Breitbart News Sunday.
Oh, pleasure.
Dr. Carson, tonight, over the weekend, you're now leading in several of the key polls in Iowa. It looks like you're in a dead heat or very close to it with Donald Trump in other states and in some nationwide polls. We've had the pleasure of talking to you now for going on 2 years on and off at these events and around the country. What is it you think about you and your campaign that now seems to be getting attention of people, and it looks like you're really having the Ben Carson moment, or you're starting to catch fire?
Well, I'm hoping it's that people are recognizing that, I'm consistent and I'm truthful, and I'm one of them. Now, before, a lot of the information that people were getting about me was information that was filtered through a very biased press. And as time goes on and more people get to hear the real thing, I think that's having a real effect.
Do you think sometimes when I watch these morning shows, I see some of the interviews you're done, do you believe that it seems to me that sometimes and we actually used the word today on the site, that you're badgered by some of these reporters, that it's not the way they treat Hillary Clinton, it's not the way they treat Bernie Sanders, it's certainly not the way they treat President Obama, but that they somehow have a certain edge when it comes to you and Donald Trump, and particularly you, that they always seems to be an edge or a subtext to the question.
Yeah, I have noticed that. And I think probably a lot of viewers have noticed it too. And one of the reasons that I keep emphasizing the fact that the press is the only business in the country that is protected by the Constitution is because they have a responsibility to the people. They're supposed to be objective and on the side of the people and not on one political side or the other. And I think people are starting to recognize the press as, for the most part, not their friend. And that's helpful to me also, obviously, because the more they badger me, the more people say, "Well, he must be a good guy." the more they certainly
listen. What is it specifically that when you say that people now have an unfiltered way to get to hear your message? You've got a website. You're doing a tremendous job with small donor donations, a real thing. What is it about? What are the 2 or 3 things you think when people come to the message of Ben Carson as a man, as a person, and now as a political figure? What is it you think that attracts people the most to you and your cause?
I think it's the fact that they know that I care about ordinary people. I talk about stuff that none of the politicians talk about that affect ordinary people. I talk about the effect of the national debt on interest rates, which then affects their ability to make money in a savings account or in the bond market. Things that used to be staples for increasing your wealth if you were in the middle class. Those things are gone. I talk about the cost of regulations in terms of goods and services and how that affects the average person, and particularly how it affects poor people. You'll never hear that from the mainstream media. You'll never hear that from politicians, and particularly from progressives. And yet, those are the things that are affecting people's lifestyles. Those are the things that have to be addressed.
Well, this week is going to be the debate out in Boulder by CNBC, one of our business channels, and the principal focus is going to be the economy and business. When you're asked these questions this week, what are the couple of things that you really want to get across to people to say, hey, I may have been a doctor, I may have been in medicine and really focused on saving people's lives and saving children's lives over my professional career, but I do have a strong sense of this economy. I do have a strong sense of where America needs to go in the world economically. What are the couple of things that you want to press upon people that would be what we would call a Ben Carson program for the economy?
Well, I want to get an opportunity to explain my tax plan, which basically is going to be a flat tax. I've costed out, the fair tax versus the flat tax, and the flat tax comes out ahead. and it's only going to have to be at 11.5%. And it's going to actually bring in at least as much revenue as this behemoth of a tax plan that we have now. And, I want to get a chance to explain that maybe in 2 or 3 questions, because you can't go through the whole thing in 1 minute, quite frankly. And, I would like to give an opportunity to talk about the expense associated with health care and how it can be done in a much more efficient way.
Well, let's go back to the taxes for a second. You're saying this kind of convoluted tax system we have, where you have literally armies of tax specialists, and I know, coming from my Goldman Sachs days when I was in the mergers and acquisition department, so many transactions, financial transactions, whether that's offerings of stock, the selling of bonds, or really mergers and acquisitions, or so much is driven by the ability to avoid taxes. You're saying you want to put in a much more simple plan, and that plan is a flat tax across the board where everyone would pay 11.5%, so you wouldn't have the very wealthy who, although they make an ordinary income because of different tax shelters, etc., they actually are paying very little taxes. Is that the point you want to get across in your flat tax?
Yes, that will get across. And, for the people who fall below 150% of the poverty line, I would make some provisions for them to get a rebate, but they still have to pay the tax. Everybody has to pay the tax because, if you put little exceptions in, like maggots on a piece of rotten meat, everybody will crawl toward the central area. And so we'll have it that way. It'll be very simplified. And, I've done all the cost analysis. It's going to be a boon, particularly when we start cutting back on the expenses. Not hiring anybody. Everybody who retires from the federal government, they will not be replaced. And you do that for 3 or 4 years, it's going to have a huge impact. And there are 645 governmental agencies and sub-agencies. And applying Lean Six Sigma type programs to each one of those, it's going to cut at least 10% out of each one of them.
Let's go back to the budget cutting. The vast majority now of the federal budget is tied to either entitlement programs or tied to interest on the debt, or to some form of health services, in entitlement programs. How, with the little bit that we have that's not defense related, that's really discretionary, even if you take a meat axe to this, how do you anticipate that's going to be, that's really going to do much except on the margins?
Well, first of all, remember, when you fix the economy by fixing the tax system and the regulations and creating an environment that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment, you're going to have a lot of money all of a sudden invested into your economy. There are trillions of dollars sitting on the sideline because we have not had a friendly environment for business for quite some time now. That's going to take some of the burden off of the entitlements, because remember, a lot of people are on entitlements illegitimately. You look at the explosion that has occurred. We don't suddenly have, these millions of people who are on disability. They just somehow happen to become disabled suddenly. I don't think so. I think, their unemployment benefits run out, and then, you get a doctor to write you a little note about your back, and now you're on disability. That's going to go away, quite frankly, when they have real jobs that they can get.
Until you solve, we've been one of the sites that is, at the forefront of kind of analyzing what Senator Sessions says and others about immigration and open borders. When you look at inner cities like Baltimore or Detroit, and I know you're very familiar with both of those cities, but you look at youth unemployment, you look at African American unemployment, it's inextricably linked to this flood of cheap labor we have from illegal immigration. And how do you actually try to solve the economic growth issues we have, and particularly the inequality of incomes, until you get your hands around the open borders and just this flooding of the zone of cheap labor?
Well, I totally agree. You have to close the borders. But that is not that difficult to do. I think I could pretty much guarantee we could close that border within a year if we had the will to do it. And just look at the examples where it has worked before, like Yuma County, Arizona. 97% decrease in illegal immigration to that area when you had the right policies in place. They had a double fence with an asphalt road so there was quick access. They actually had border guards on the border. Now, that's a novel idea. And they actually prosecuted first-time offenders. And it was easy. And you add to that, some of the other surveillance techniques that we now have, drones and early warning systems, I think you can get pretty close to 100%.
So when you see establishment people like Karl Rove and others, the Wall Street Journal opinion page, dismiss this idea of either putting up a fence or putting up tremendously increased security, putting up a lot more border guards and really securing the border, and they dismiss it as a fantasy of the Rube, segment of the Republican Party, the Breitbart Patriot Channel, Donald Trump, Dr. Carson crowd. You disagree with that? You think it's a matter of political will?
I totally disagree with it, and we've got the facts to prove that it can be done. It's not theoretical. So we can do it. We just don't have the will to do it. And I've been down on that border. I mean, I've been appalled at what I saw. Anybody could get through there.
Jeb Bush's program to turn the economy around really goes to an arithmetic solution, which says, hey, I'm going to put these policies in, they're going to give us 4% growth. And if you do the math, 4% growth starts to work us out of a lot of problems. We obviously don't have 4% growth and haven't had it compounded 4% growth for quite a while. Your policies of putting in a flat tax, your policies of this deregulation, your policies of going in and really cutting discretionary spending, you will be able to present a plan that you show that can actually get to these type of growth levels, that can actually help the American economy grow its way out of its problems? I think
4% is modest, to be honest with you. I mean, we've had this long, chronic neglect, quite frankly, of the factors that gave us a dynamic economy. Recognize that this country declared its independence in 1776. Less than 100 years later, was the number one economic power in the world. I mean, that is unprecedented. And the reason was because we established the right kind of environment. So, entrepreneurship, innovation, those kinds of things were easy to do in that kind of environment. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We need to look back and understand what was going on then and then recreate that. American creativity is just as great as it ever has been. We just have to stop stifling it.
Dr. Carson, if you continue on this trajectory and actually end up being the Republican nominee, in all likelihood, it looks like, at least right now, you will take on Hillary Clinton unless something it comes up on the Democratic side. But right now, it doesn't look like it is. How do you assess Hillary Clinton's economic policies? When you look at what a Dr. Carson program would be versus what Hillary Clinton and kind of Clintonism has meant over the past couple of decades, how do you weigh and measure that?
Well, the usual tax and spend, promise them everything, give them nothing policies. I think it would be the most clear-cut election in history. And I would relish it because it will give an opportunity to really explain to people what the impact is of the incredible amount of debt that has been piled on during the Obama administration. It's doubled, the national debt has, and the deleterious effect that has on saving and increasing one's wealth. Showing people how that actually works, I think she'll be hard-pressed. But also, being able to demonstrate to people the whole concept of dishonesty. I mean, she's the poster child for that. And I relish it. That's all I can say. I relish an opportunity.
I've had an opportunity to know you for a while. One of the things, I think it was today or the other day, you came out was talking about when you were a young man and some of the anger that was there, and actually some of the situations you came up. Could you explore that for a second with us? Because having known you, I didn't. I think one of the reasons people are so attracted to you is that you're a very strong-willed person, but you come about things in a very humble manner, and you come about that in a very soft-spoken manner, which is so different than I think a lot of people see in politics today. But it seems like in your youth there was an anger there.
I was terribly violent. I would get angry with almost anything. I was a person who thought I had a lot of rights, so people are always infringing on my rights. And I would go after people with baseball bats and bricks and hammers and what have you, creating a lot of damage sometimes. And when I was 14, I tried to stab another youngster in the abdomen with a large camping knife, and fortunately he had a large belt buckle on under his clothing. The knife blade hit it with such force that it broke, and he fled, but I was more horrified than he was, and I went into a bathroom, locked myself in there, and just started contemplating my life. I had turned things around academically. I had been a horrible student. I had become a straight A student, but I still had that temper problem, and I realized the grave, reform school, or jail, those were my options, and I didn't like any of those. So I fell on my knees, and I just prayed that God would somehow help me, and I picked up a Bible, and there were all these verses in the book of Proverbs about anger, and it seemed like they were all written about me, but I came to an understanding that to lash out at somebody, to try to punch someone in the face was not a sign of strength, but rather a sign of weakness, and it made you very vulnerable to other people and circumstances. And I also recognize that when you're angry all the time, you're selfish, because it's always about me, my, and I. Somebody took my thing, they did this to me, I want this. So I learned how to step outside the center of the circle and let it be about somebody else. And that was the last day I had an angry episode. And it really changed my demeanor. That's how I've become this very calm person.
So it was really your engagement with the Bible and with Christianity that to
Absolutely.
a large extent got this anger out and really made the man that we know today as Dr. Ben Carson.
I've had a real personal experience with God, and that's why my faith is so strong.
Dr. Carson, what do you think people throughout the country are starting to see that now? Because I've noticed you, and not just the learning curve of how to become a better practical, politician, because at the end of the day, to be president, you have to be a politician, but that people are drawn to you for qualities that I think maybe they don't see in other people, particularly people running for public office. Do you think it's because of this, your embrace of Christianity, but really taking it down to the core of your being?
I think that has a lot to do with it. People recognize also that, I spent my entire professional career as a pediatric neurosurgeon working so hard to try to give little precious children a chance at life. And that's what I'm trying to do again, trying to give them a chance at a bright future, not one in which they'll be saddled with untold debt, not one in which they live in a society that restricts everything because of political correctness, and not one that is subject to the will of the United Nations or other nations because of its own weakness.
Dr. Carson, I know that you've taken a break in your preparation for the coming debate. I really want to thank you for sharing this with our audience tonight. The readers of Breitbart and on the Patriot Channel really can't get enough of the wisdom and insights of Dr. Carson. So thank you very much for taking time away tonight to join us.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
That's Dr. Ben Carson. He is now leading in many of the polls in the state of Iowa. He's also very close and neck and neck to Donald Trump in the national scene on the race for the Republican nomination.